The crisp autumn air nipped at Sarah Miller's cheeks as she pulled her dusty Volvo into the driveway of the Victorian house. Ashton Falls, Massachusetts, was everything she'd hoped for. Quaint, quiet, and steeped in New England charm. This house, inherited from a great aunt she barely remembered, stood proudly amidst towering maples, their leaves a vibrant tapestry of red and gold. Its grey clapboard siding was weathered, and the porch sagged slightly, but Sarah saw potential. A blank canvas for a fresh start. After a messy breakup and the soul-crushing monotony of her old job in Boston, this was exactly what she needed. Unlocking the heavy oak front door, she was greeted by the scent of dust and aged wood. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass. Windows, casting colourful patterns on the worn wooden floors. The house was undeniably old, its history etched into every creaking floorboard and ornate detail. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from the chill. There was something about the house, a quiet stillness that felt both comforting and unsettling. She brushed it off, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of her new surroundings. This was her new home, a place to rebuild, to rediscover herself. That night! Exhaustion claimed Sarah quickly, but her sleep was far from restful. She found herself wandering the familiar hallways of the Victorian house, yet everything was subtly, disturbingly different. The warm hues of the daytime had been replaced by an oppressive gloom, the shadows stretching long and distorted. The air was thick with a cold, damp chill that seeped into her bones. The cheerful patterns of the stained glass windows were now dark and opaque, blocking out any trace of moonlight. A low, rhythmic creaking echoed through the house, like the sound of someone slowly pacing overhead. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She called out, her voice a mere whisper in the oppressive silence, but no one answered. As she moved deeper into the house, the temperature dropped noticeably. A faint, musty odor, like decaying leaves and damp earth, filled her nostrils. She turned a corner and found herself in the living room, but the furniture was draped in white sheets, giving the room the eerie feel of a mausoleum. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught her eye. In the corner of the room, a dark shape shifted in the shadows. Sarah strained to see, her breath catching in her throat. The shape seemed to coalesce, taking on a vaguely human form. A cold dread washed over her as she realized she wasn't alone. A whisper, barely audible, brushed her ear, sending shivers down her spine. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was filled with a deep, unsettling sadness. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shape vanished, leaving her alone. In the oppressive silence once more, Sarah gasped, jolting awake, her heart racing, the lingering chill of the dream still clinging to her skin. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to peek through her bedroom window, but the unsettling feeling from the dream lingered. A dark cloud hanging over the start of her day. The unsettling dream wasn't a one-off occurrence. Night after night, Sarah was plunged back into the distorted version of her new home. The details varied slightly. Sometimes the shadows were deeper, sometimes the whispers were closer, but the core elements remained the same. The oppressive chill, the rhythmic creaking, the sense of being watched. The dark shape in the corner became more defined, sometimes appearing as a tall, gaunt figure, other times as a fleeting shadow that darted just out of sight. The whispers, too, grew more distinct, though she still couldn't decipher the words. They sounded like a mournful lament, filled with a deep, aching sorrow. Sleep became a dreaded event. Sarah would lie in bed, her heart pounding, dreading the moment she would drift off and be pulled back into the nightmare. The lack of sleep began to take its toll. During the day, she felt constantly exhausted, her mind foggy and her nerves frayed. She found it difficult to concentrate on her work, her designs becoming sloppy and uninspired. Her appetite waned, and she lost a noticeable amount of weight. One afternoon, while struggling to focus on a project, Sarah decided to research the history of her house. She found some old records at the town hall, detailing the various owners over the years. One name stood out: Blackwood. The house had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family with that surname. A brief online search revealed a few local history websites mentioning the Blackwood family and a tragic incident that had occurred in their home many years ago. Details were scarce, but the word tragedy kept appearing. A sense of unease settled over Sarah. Could her dreams be connected to this past tragedy? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a chilling echo of the cold she felt in her dreams. She knew she had to learn more. The next day, Sarah ventured into the Ashton Falls Public Library, a charming brick building with ivy climbing its walls. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Davison, greeted her with a warm smile. Sarah explained her interest in the history of her house, mentioning the Blackwood family. Mrs. Davison's smile faltered slightly. "Ah, the Blackwood house," she said, her voice softening. "A sad story, that." She led Sarah to a section of local history archives, pulling out a thick leather-bound volume. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photographs, and handwritten accounts of Ashton Falls' past. They found several articles about the Blackwood family. The articles spoke of a prominent family, pillars of the community, until tragedy struck. A young daughter, Emily Blackwood, had died in the house under mysterious circumstances. The official cause of death was listed as a fall, but whispers and rumors persisted for years afterward. Some townspeople believed it was an accident. Others suspected something more sinister. Mrs. Davison pointed to a faded photograph of a young girl with dark hair and large, expressive eyes. "This was Emily," she said softly. "A beautiful child. It was a terrible loss for the family and for the town." She added in a hushed tone, "Some say her spirit never truly left that house." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, the image of the girl's face burning into her memory. The pieces were starting to fall into place, the connection between her dreams and the tragic history of the house becoming clearer, the unsettling feeling she had experienced since moving. It now had a name: Emily Blackwood. The information Sarah gleaned from the library only intensified her anxiety. The recurring nightmares continued, now tinged with the added weight of Emily's story. The whispers in her dreams seemed to carry a new urgency, a desperate plea. Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, even during the day. Convinced she was being watched, the line between her waking life and her dream world began to blur. She started to question her own sanity. Were these just nightmares, fueled by stress and an overactive imagination, or was there something truly supernatural at play? She tried to talk to a few of her colleagues about her sleepless nights and the unsettling feeling she had about the house, but their responses were dismissive. They attributed her anxieties to the stress of moving and starting a new job. "You're just tired, Sarah," they'd say. "Get some rest and you'll be fine." Their reassurances, however well-intentioned, did little to ease her growing unease. She felt increasingly isolated, unable to share the true extent of her fear. The isolation deepened her doubt. Perhaps she was overreacting. Perhaps she was letting her imagination run wild. But deep down, a persistent voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. She started avoiding social gatherings, making excuses to stay home, where she felt both trapped and strangely protected. The house, once a symbol of a fresh start, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her, the weight of its history pressing down on her soul. She felt utterly alone, trapped between the waking world and the terrifying realm of her dreams. One particularly stormy night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the old house like skeletal fingers. Sarah lay in bed, her body tense, dreading the inevitable descent into sleep. As she drifted off, the familiar chill enveloped her, and she found herself back in the shadowy hallways. But this time, something was different. The oppressive gloom seemed to have lifted slightly, replaced by a faint ethereal glow. The whispers were clearer, closer, no longer a mournful lament, but a soft, almost pleading murmur. She found herself drawn to the living room, the room with the draped furniture from her first dream. As she entered, the white sheets seemed to shimmer and dissolve, revealing the room's original furnishings. In the corner where the dark shape usually lurked stood a figure. It was the figure of a young girl, her dark hair framing a pale face with large, expressive eyes, the same eyes she had seen in the photograph at the library. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was Emily. The girl looked directly at Sarah, her gaze filled with a deep sadness. There was no malice in her eyes, only a profound sense of longing. Then, in a voice barely audible above the howling wind outside, Emily whispered a single word. "Sarah." The sound sent a jolt through Sarah, and she snapped awake, her heart pounding. The storm still raged outside, but the chilling presence from her dream lingered, a tangible reminder of the encounter. This time, it wasn't just a nightmare. It felt real, a direct communication. Emily knew her name. The whispered name echoed in Sarah's mind throughout the following day. The encounter with Emily in her dream felt profoundly different from the previous nightmares. It wasn't a terrifying vision, but a connection, a plea. Sarah felt a strange compulsion to understand what Emily wanted, what she was trying to communicate. The thought of the attic, a place she had instinctively avoided since moving in, surfaced in her mind. It was the only part of the house she hadn't explored, a dark, dusty space filled with forgotten relics of the past. That evening, armed with a flashlight and a deep breath, Sarah ascended the narrow, creaking staircase leading to the attic. The air grew colder and thicker with each step. The attic was a large, unfinished space, cluttered with old furniture covered in dust sheets, forgotten trunks, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, creating an eerie atmosphere. As she moved deeper into the attic, she noticed a small wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was partially hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. With trembling hands, she pulled the trunk out and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled among faded lace and yellowed letters, was a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was worn and cracked, but the title, written in elegant script, was still legible: Emily's Journal. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. This had to be it. This was what Emily wanted her to find. Carefully, she lifted the diary from the trunk, her fingers brushing against something else hidden beneath it, a small silver locket shaped like a heart. She tucked the locket into her pocket and descended back downstairs, eager to unravel the secrets held within Emily's words. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the diary open before her. The handwriting was delicate and childlike, the ink faded with age. As she began to read, Emily's story unfolded before her eyes. The diary entries painted a picture of a happy, imaginative young girl, full of life and dreams. But as the entries progressed, a darker tone emerged. Emily wrote of feeling watched, of hearing whispers in the night, of a growing sense of fear within her own home. The final entries, written just days before her death, revealed a horrifying truth. Emily hadn't fallen down the stairs as everyone believed. She had been pushed. The last entry described a confrontation with a family member, someone she trusted, who had become increasingly erratic and possessive. The name was smudged and barely legible, but Sarah could make out the first initial, C. As Sarah read these words, a wave of cold air swept through the kitchen, and the lights flickered. A faint image materialized in the corner of the room, Emily, her face etched with terror, reenacting the moment she was pushed. Sarah gasped, dropping the diary. The vision was vivid and horrifying, a replay of the tragic event. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of grief and anger. Emily's spectral form became more solid, her eyes fixed on Sarah, pleading for justice. The locket in Sarah's pocket felt warm against her skin. It was as if Emily's energy was flowing through it, connecting them. The room grew colder still, and a whisper, clear and distinct, echoed through the room. "He took my life." The whisper was filled with a raw pain that resonated deep within Sarah's soul. This was no longer just a story. It was a cry for help from beyond the grave. The vision of Emily's final moments, coupled with her desperate plea, solidified Sarah's resolve. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen and read. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was a cry for justice, a plea from a young girl whose life had been tragically cut short. Clutching the diary and the locket, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let Emily's story remain buried in the past. The next morning, Sarah drove to the Ashton Falls police station. She felt a mix of nervousness and determination as she walked through the doors. She explained her experiences, the recurring nightmares, the discovery of the diary, and the vision of Emily's murder. The officer on duty listened with a skeptical expression, but Sarah's earnestness and the physical evidence she presented, the diary and the locket, gave him pause. He took down her statement and agreed to look into the matter. A few days later, Sarah received a call from Detective Miller, no relation. The police had reopened the investigation into Emily Blackwood's death. The diary entries, combined with some newly uncovered genealogical records, pointed to a previously overlooked suspect, a distant cousin of the Blackwood family, a man named Charles Blackwood, who had been living in the house at the time of Emily's death. He had since moved away and was now living in another state. The police contacted him, and after a brief interrogation, he confessed to pushing Emily down the stairs during an argument. He had always been jealous of her close relationship with her parents and had acted in a fit of rage. Finally, after all these years, Emily's killer would face justice. The news of Charles Blackwood's confession brought a wave of relief over Sarah. A weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying lifted from her shoulders. The oppressive atmosphere in the house began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm she hadn't felt since moving in. The nights that followed were blessedly silent. The nightmares ceased, and Sarah finally experienced restful, undisturbed sleep. She no longer felt the chilling presence, the feeling of being watched. The house felt lighter, more welcoming, as if a dark cloud had finally passed. One evening, Sarah found herself drawn to the living room, the site of her most vivid dream encounters with Emily. She sat on the sofa, gazing out the window at the twilight sky. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees outside, and the soft glow of the setting sun bathed the room in a warm golden light. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom she had experienced in her dreams. As she sat there, a faint image flickered in the corner of the room. It was Emily, but she looked different. Her face was no longer etched with terror or sadness, but with a peaceful smile. She didn't speak, but Sarah felt a sense of gratitude emanating from her, a silent thank you. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, Emily vanished, leaving behind only a lingering sense of peace. Sarah knew in that moment that Emily had finally found the peace she had been searching for. Her spirit was finally at rest. The house was no longer haunted, but healed. The experience had changed Sarah. The fear and doubt that had plagued her for weeks had been replaced by a newfound sense of strength and resilience. She had faced the darkness, confronted the past, and helped bring justice to a long-forgotten tragedy. The house in Ashton Falls was no longer a source of fear, but a symbol of her own courage and compassion. She reconnected with her friends and colleagues, sharing a simplified version of her experience, focusing on the historical research and the reopened investigation. She didn't feel the need to explain the supernatural aspects. The tangible results, the solved case and her newfound peace spoke for themselves. Sarah continued her life in Ashton Falls, embracing the small-town charm and the quiet beauty of the New England landscape. The house, once a place of shadows and whispers, had become a true home, filled with light and warmth. She had come to Ashton Falls seeking a fresh start, and she had found it, not in escaping her past, but in confronting it and helping another find peace. The experience had left its mark, a reminder of the unseen connections that bind us to the past and the power of empathy to heal even the deepest wounds. She was no longer just Sarah Miller, the woman running from her past. She was Sarah Miller, the woman who had helped a lost soul find its way home.